There's a lot of talk out there about AI and a lot of talk about the benefits of AI and what people are using it for. But it's very important to also understand the limitations of AI. What AI can't yet do, because once you understand what it can't yet do, you'll understand how to best use it, you'll know what to use it for, what not to use it for, and also what to expect from it. Because a lot of people, they try AI tools with this expectation that it's going to be some magical tool that's going to do anything they want for them quickly and easily at the touch of a button. And when it doesn't do that, they think, well, it's not actually worth bothering with. I may as well just do everything manually myself as I've always been doing. There's a very real temptation to revert back to what you've always done if the new tool isn't meeting your expectations. Whereas actually, if you understand how you can use it, how you can get the most of it, but still bear in mind those limitations, you'll find it a really useful tool to help you do your job. So what are some of these limitations? Well, we're going to run through some, and we're going to give some, when appropriate, when applicable, some workarounds as well. So the first thing to understand is that AI only works with what you give it. If you give it garbage, it will give you garbage. It doesn't know what you are thinking. It's not reading your thoughts. You have to explain everything you want it to do in real detail. It can't fill in the gaps that you have in your mind because you've briefly described what you're thinking about. You think it's going to make all those extra steps for you. For example, if you don't give it context, if it doesn't know anything about your client or about the systems you use, then saying, analyze this client and put all the output into a format that's going to go into our reconciliation system. It doesn't know what system you're using. It doesn't know what client you're talking about. It doesn't know exactly what you want it to do. If you're not giving it context, it's not going to give you an appropriate response. Also, if you use vague prompts, if you aren't specific, then you're going to get generic results. Generic requests yield generic results. So you have to provide context to try and get the most out of it. You have to provide direction in order to get a decent output. So always include specific details about the industry, about the audience, about the task, and the goals you want for the output. The more detail you give it, the more specific its response is going to be. So that's a key point there. It's not a miracle worker. It's not going to know what you're thinking and read your mind, read your thoughts. You have to give it very, very specific details. Also, one thing to remember is AI doesn't actually know what's true. Now, this might sound strange, but it is the case. AI has access to this enormous wealth of information, but the way it actually works, the way artificial intelligence actually works, is through pattern recognition, generating responses based on language modeling and algorithms. It's not literally reading something like a human being would read something and analyzing it and interpreting it and fact-checking it. It's not actually producing verified facts necessarily. Now, a lot of what it says is completely true and completely accurate. But my point being that it's not reviewing the information and generating information in quite the same way as a human would do, even if the output appears to be that way. It's actually generating things based on patterns and algorithms, not by actually analyzing this information. And as a result, it can very confidently fabricate information, sounding very, very professional. It can start talking about studies have shown that X, Y, Z, and all these sorts of things, and it's actually making up information. It's not actually true. So another key tip here to get around this limitation is to always make sure you verify the information. AI is not a substitute for trusted sources. Now, you can use the information, you can verify AI by asking it to check itself, by copying the information out and putting it into another AI large language model and asking it to review that information, or quizzing it on its sources And you might find it actually then corrects itself when you actually ask it to look at this particular source. Like say tax, it's provided a tax information for you, and then you post in the HMRC website and say, using this information on this website, double check everything you've said and see if it's correct. And chances are, if there is something that is incorrect, it will come back saying, sorry, my mistake, I'd said this, but I actually mean X, Y, Z. So always verify the information, and as a human, you still have that ultimate responsibility, so you need to be double checking the output as well. But that doesn't mean that it's not a useful tool. It can still do a lot of the work for you, but you just have to be there to review, to check the outputs. And precision can still be a struggle. It doesn't necessarily know what you want to do, and even if you give it what seems like a huge amount of instructions, it doesn't always get the task right. Now, of course, you can prevent this a bit by providing more specific requests rather than using vague requests. You can offer quite specific ones. Say, I need a 3-point summary. It needs to look specifically at this, and this is exactly the purpose for it. That helps, but it doesn't necessarily get the job done first time. You might still have to refine it. You might still have to ask it to do things again. If you've got a very, very specific tone and style of writing and you want it to replicate your style and tone exactly, it can be very, very difficult to actually get it to do that. Because for starters, how do you define exactly what your style of writing is? That's one of the problems here, is that it can only work off of what you give it, but defining what you want can be very difficult, particularly if you're looking for an absolute specific outcome. Also, it can't learn or remember between sessions. Now, of course, AI can learn if you've got the security turned off, which means that it learns from everything you put in. But actually, despite me saying that AI can't learn is a limitation, you actually want it to be that in that case. Particularly for accountants, particularly if we're using sensitive client information, we don't actually want it to learn from what we're putting in, because then we risk sharing private information. And it can't remember between sessions either. So if you open ChatGPT, ask it some questions, close it down, you open it up in the next day and open a new chat and start talking to it again, it's not going to specifically remember everything that you discussed last time. So, for example, today we might provide the client profile, might provide all the context about it. We might ask it a load of questions and get really good responses, go off and respond to the client, and then next week we decide we need to start analyzing that information again for another client, or the same format of information for another client with different information. It's not going to remember what it did. You can't just say, oh, that thing you did for me last week, do all of that again in exactly the same way, but for this client and this client's information. It doesn't remember that. But a workaround for that is to save templates. Is when you've had some experimentation with it and you've got up to speed with what it can offer and what you want from it, save templates as well, or save projects within GPT itself, etc. And so you can replicate and reuse that content and those prompts time and time again. Also remember, it doesn't understand your business like you do. You can say you are an accountant and you need to analyze this information and you need to do X, Y, Z, but it doesn't have your expertise. It doesn't have those nuances and judgments that you've learned from working at the company that you've worked for and the industry that you've worked in for what could be decades. It doesn't have that background information, that background expertise. Again, it only goes off quite black and white information that it can analyze. And this is especially true when it comes to things like client relationships and tone and expectations in your communications with clients as well. If you've been dealing with a client for 20 years, they know you incredibly well. They know exactly every single nuance of your conversational style, etc. And so there's a real risk then if you start using AI to communicate with that client, they're going to immediately say, that accountant doesn't talk like this. Even if you try your hardest to get it to talk in the right tone, to try and mimic you as best as possible, someone is going to realize, someone that's been emailing back and forth with you every week for 20 years is going to realize that this is a shift in tone and a shift in the style of communication. And also things like your internal policies and the way in which your business specifically approaches information. If you ask it to conduct a review of certain accounts, if you ask it to draft a report or to reconcile some information and statements, etc., it's going to do that in a way that it can basically look at what companies do with regards to reconciliation or reports, or it will use a huge background of information through pattern and algorithms to identify generally how this happens and conduct it in that process. I'm sorry, that's a bit convoluted, but what I essentially mean is if you ask it to review a business report, it will look through a vast database of business reports and analysis of business reports, and it will summarize in its mind an approach for analyzing business reports and review that business report in that format. Whereas your company might have a very, very specific way of doing things, which is actually part of your competitive advantage. So you don't actually want it to lose that. So the internal approaches, internal policies that your business has and the way your business does things isn't necessarily going to automatically come through AI. Also, some tasks at the moment are just too complex for it. Now, that might sound odd given that AI, in a sense, has as much wealth of knowledge and expertise and intellect as vast portions of humanity put together at this point. The argument that the AI can't handle something that a human can handle might seem a bit odd, but it's more to do with the subtle nuances of different things and the fact that you still need that human expert to analyze something. And if it's so complex, it gets to the point where the human has to spend as much time analyzing it as if they just created it from scratch in the first place. So, for example, really complicated contractual legal clauses that need expert interpretation. Again, it's too complex for the AI to necessarily analyze them to the same extent as a well-qualified solicitor at this point. And things like regulated audits as well and compliance requirements that demand human oversight. It can't replace that human oversight at this point. And bear in mind that you don't necessarily want it to, because you, as the user and as the firm that you represent, etc., remain legally responsible. AI models are not to blame for mistakes that they make. Even if you rely on it to your detriment, you can't turn around and say, well, the AI got it wrong. We trusted it and it let us down. We had the right to trust this system and it let us down. That is not an excuse. But it's important to remember that limitations don't mean that it's useless. Just because it can't do everything in your job for you doesn't mean that there isn't value in it. Microsoft Excel can't do your job for you, but do you think that Excel is useless because it doesn't do certain things? It has specific tools or specific functions that you use it for. And AI is the same. AI is a tool that can be used to help, but it doesn't mean that it's going to do everything for you. So in short, being aware of where AI capabilities stop, knowing where you can use it, where you can't use it, is going to help you to get the best out of it. Areas that you know you can use it for, use it as much as possible. And that actually will save time, save resources for you to focus on the areas that it can't be used for. And when you use it within those appropriate boundaries, you'll be able to use it effectively, you'll be able to use it very efficiently, and essentially think of it as a partner. Combine the strength of the AI with your expertise. It's like a partner that's always there, that's always on, that you can ask questions all the time. It never needs a break, it never needs to go and get lunch or anything like that. It's never going to get tired of you asking it too many questions. It's a partner for you. So make as much use of it as possible, but just be aware of those limitations. So some key takeaways here. AI needs specific information. There are certain things AI can't do, but to get as much as you can out of it, you need to be as specific as possible. You need to be aware that it won't fact check itself. Now, it can potentially fact check itself if you specifically take the output and put it back in and ask it to conduct a full review of it, but it won't necessarily verify facts on its original output, because remember, it runs off of algorithms and language patterns. It doesn't actually analyze the information and produce an output, even if it appears to be looking through a document and producing an output in exactly the same way a human might do. The actual way in which it works, the science behind it, is completely different. So it won't naturally be looking at it in the same way a human would look at it. Remember that it is a helper. It's expertise that assists you, but ultimately you are the one in the driving seat. It cannot replace your expertise, but used effectively, it will be a huge time saver, really helping speed up administrative tasks and helping with initial drafts to make them far more quicker and easier. So drafting smarter in a sense. But remember, it's not replacing you. You still need to add your expertise in to get the most out of it. So in short, AI really, really useful, only getting more and more helpful, but there are some key limitations, and you'd be a fool to rely on it blindly without applying your expertise. But hopefully you've now got a good idea of what it can do, what it can't do, and you're now in a good position to go away and start using it more effectively as a tool to help make your job and your life easier and more effective.